Hey, third grade. Our purpose as readers. I can identify features of a narrative and free verse poem. We're going to read a couple narrative poems today and a free verse poem today, and we're going to use the features to help us identify those types of poems. So what is narrative? A narrative tells a story. Kind of like a personal narrative. You tell your personal story when you write a personal narrative. Narrative is just a fancy word for story. Narrative often rhymes. It has stanzas, and in those stanzas, there will be a specific group of lines. A free verse expresses feeling and does not always rhyme. It can rhyme. And it does not always have the same number of lines in each stanza. So let's go into our poems to identify the features of these poems. Our first poem is called Ginger's Fingers. So again, we want to use our features of a narrative and free verse poem to decide what genre this poem is. Ginger's Fingers. Ginger's fingers are shooting stars. They talk of adventurous trips to Mars. Fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard. Ginger's fingers are ocean waves. They talk of fish in deep sea caves. Fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard. Ginger's fingers are butterflies. They talk of a honeygold sunrise. Fingers talking without words, signing when sounds can't be heard. This poem is telling about Ginger's fingers and how she uses her fingers to form words. So that tells us that Ginger uses sign language to communicate. And I see 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines. Those 2 lines are grouped together because they're indented at the same spot. Fingers, signing, those are indented at the same spot. Also, every 2 lines rhyme. Stars, Mars, words heard, waves, caves. We have repetition, words heard, butterflies, sunrise. So this tells us that this poem has a structure of using stanzas with the same number of lines. There's rhyming words, and it tells a story about Ginger's fingers using sign language to communicate. We just identified this poem as a narrative. It tells a story. It has stanzas with the same number of lines and rhyming words. Let's read The Giant with the same purpose of identifying features of whether or not this is a narrative poem or a free verse poem. The Giant. Dodge, dart, dash, zigzag, slash. I sizzle, sizzle when I dribble on lightning on the court. My team calls me the Giant, even though I'm kind of short. The other team might laugh to see a player tiny as a flea, but I'm a rocket fiery hot. Watch me soar, soar on my jump shot. Stretching, flexing, push, push, push. My ball flies up and in, swoosh, whoosh. I show them all you don't need tall to rule the ball. As I was reading this story, it seemed as if the boy is telling a story about his dribble when he's playing basketball. So I'm thinking maybe it's a narrative, but it has other features of a free verse. It does sometimes rhyme, but there's no pattern for rhyming. And it does have stanzas, but each stanza has a different number of lines. So this poem is a free verse poem. It doesn't always have the same rhyming pattern, and it has a different number of lines in each stanza. Let's read on. This is our last poem for today. Captain's Log, May 12th, 1868. We set sail from a port in Spain. Sun high, no sign of rain. The sea was satin, so blue, so blue. Our ship was a bird, we flew, we flew. Just past noon, how very weird, came a sound that we most feared. Thunder rumbled the giant drum, thunder rumbled rum-tum-tum. Rain was pouring, pouring. The wind was a monster, roaring, roaring. My crew, extremely terrified, froze at their posts, pale and wide-eyed. A huge wave lifted up our ship. My feet began to slip, slip, slip. I knew that it was up to me to guide us through that stormy sea. I grabbed a rope, reached for the mast, and got back to the helm at last. Shook off the rain, looked at my crew. Steady, lads, I'll get us through. The crew heard my call. Each lad stood up tall. All hands now on deck, we trimmed every sail. Courageous, together, we rode out that gale. Okay, so I need to use the features of our poems to identify whether or not this is narrative or free verse. I do see stanzas, and in each stanza, I see a pattern. I see 4 lines in each stanza. I also notice at the end of each line of the stanzas were rhyming words, and they followed a pattern. Another feature I noticed is that this poem tells a story about a captain saving his crew from a storm at sea. So we just identified that this tells a story. It has a stanza with a set number of lines, and it has rhyming words that follow a pattern. So this is a narrative. Let's use what we know to answer our questions. You are now going to answer questions in your Reading Wonders backpack after watching how I model my thinking when answering these questions on my Reading Wonders backpack. You will have the same 4 questions, so use this video to help you. Does this poem rhyme? Well, we're going to restate that question and answer it. So we cross off the question word. And then we restate this poem has rhyming. Now we need evidence to support this poem has rhyming. For example, that shows us that we are going to get evidence from the text. The first 2 lines end with Spain and rain. Those are rhyming words. They have the same ending sound. Another example, that phrase tells us we're going to get evidence from the text, is that the second 2 lines end with blue and flew. So again, we have 2 rhyming words that support our restatement and answer. Number 2, if a poem does not rhyme, what kind of poem is it? So a free verse does not always have to rhyme. So if it does not rhyme, if a poem does not rhyme, it is called a free verse. And this does not have any text evidence because the poem that we're reading is not a free verse. Number 3, what event does the speaker talk about? Again, we restated the events the speaker talks about are, and we use the poem, a captain saving his crew and ship from a storm at sea. Now we need text evidence. The poem says, so that phrase tells us that we're getting text evidence from the poem, to guide us through that stormy sea. That is text evidence directly from the text. It also states, courageous, together we rode out that gale. And gale means storm, so that connects directly to our answer, saving the crew and ship from a storm at sea. And here it is, that evidence directly from the text. Courageous, together we rode out that gale. Number 4, are the events in the poem real or imagined? How do you know? All right, we are restating the events in the story could be real because it has a real date and storms that could really threaten sailors at sea. How do you know? That's the 2 pieces of text evidence. For example, the poem is dated May 12, 1868, so that connects to the real date in our answer. And our second piece of text evidence, it also states a huge wave lifted up our ship. That connects to the storm that could really threaten sailors at sea in our answer. All right, 3rd graders. We have just identified features of a narrative and free verse poem. So remember, narrative tells a story, often rhymes, and has stanzas with the same number of lines. Free verse expresses feelings, does not always have to rhyme, it might not rhyme, and does not always have the same number of lines in each stanza. Good luck, third grade. Now you get to use those features to answer the questions in your Reading Winners backpack.